Hello, my name is Daniel Stillwell. I am the editor of the IFTA e-newsletter, and today we have with us Andrew Sofin. He is the chairperson or the head of Canada's Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, or is it Marital and Family Therapy?
It's still marriage and family therapy.
Okay.
We're trying to change the M to a C, but it's work in the progress.
Okay. Well, then that kind of leads us nicely into my first question is, what kind of mental health practitioner do you identify as, and what does that look like in your context?
Good question. Definitely I identify as a couple and family therapist. That's definitely a term that we use very much in Canada. We say couple and family therapist, as compared to, I know in the States where you have the LMFT, and in Europe, they seem to very much identify as family therapists. So I see it definitely as couple and family. I tend to do a lot more work just with couples. So I do intensive couples therapy retreats. So I would say I definitely lean much more to really focusing on a couple and how to help a couple move forward with the goals they present. And as many therapists, I work in that area, but I also work in eating disorders where I do family work. I kind of like having two quite different areas so that I can kind of move back and forth. And the family therapy with eating disorders is a very, very different clinical presentation. It's very different work. And they're both exciting, but I find if I do too much with one, I start going like, oh, I think I need to move back over to the other one for a while. That's just, I think, my personality.
Well, and I think that a lot of the systemic therapists that I've talked to find that because they can see the interconnections, they don't enjoy being sort of stuck in one pigeonhole for everything.
Good point. Absolutely. I find you start seeing, well, what I want to look at the family again, when I'm doing the couples, and then I'm doing the family, and I'm like, you know what, I'd like to kind of narrow it down just to the couple for a while.
Yeah, let's focus on different dyads.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and you practice in Canada, and so being in charge of the organization at this time, I wanted to hopefully get a chance to talk to you about the state of family therapy or systemic therapy in Canada.
It is interesting because the whole it really grew more in the States, under, sort of the larger associations in the States, and then the licensure of the LMFT, which didn't really happen in Canada. It was only Quebec was the only one with a license. And I think it was more because of the differences in the countries. And so really, couple and family therapy has really been something that has been treated much more as a modality than as a distinct profession. I think now it's getting a lot more attention given, well, especially during the pandemic, but especially in schools and in places like in the eating disorder world. In those areas, people are like, yeah, we need people that are really well trained in systemic relational work. And I think it's, there's not going to be licensure across our whole country. That's not going to happen. It's really going to be, there's going to be a psychotherapy permit, and then there's going to be your expertise. So in Canada, that would be a registered marriage and family therapist would be your expertise. And it's similar to being a clinical fellow at AAMFT, but that would show the public, okay, here's somebody who's very well trained in doing systemic and relational work. Most people definitely will sort of say, yes, my heart is in systemic couple and family work, but I'm licensed as a psychologist, a social worker, a nurse, a psychiatrist. I think this coming unfolding of this psychotherapy permit across the country is going to let more and more people who really identify as couple and family therapists really say, okay, I'm just going to get the psychotherapy permit, then I'll get the RMFT to really sort of say, yeah, this is where I want to hang my shingle.
Okay, so this is in flux, or this is in process?
Yes. Oh, yeah, not the whole country. So this RP is rolled out in around 5 of the provinces. It's at various stages of development. It's called different things. But it's actually not a bad way of looking at it, because it allows people to be a little bit more flexible rather than just saying, I'm an LMFT. Okay, you know, and once again, because our association, we basically own the RMFT designation, we're going to change it. It's going to be RCFT. You know, we can do that. Governments can't. We want to get rid of the M, the marriage, and put a couple in, because it's long overdue. And even in our name. But as I think, as everybody knows, trying to get any changes that are of a legal or anything like that, governmental, you know, approval, is a very long and slow journey, which we have very much learned. But I would say couple and family therapy is very alive and well in Canada. And since we left, we used to be part of AAMFT, and since we became independent in 2017, it's been nothing but an upward trajectory, because we understand our own country. It's, you know, in French they say maître chez nous, you know, masters of our own house. In other words, we know how it works in our country. You know, it'd be like me coming down to the States and saying, hey, this is how you should do it. And you're like, well, our rules and laws are different.
Yeah.
So,
let alone the cultural implications of everything.
Huge cultural implications. Because don't forget, Canada is also a country that is definitely looks more to the collective than the individual. And I think that's absolutely been, well, we're a northern country. You can't survive a winter on your own. You have to work as a collective. You cannot get through winter unless you're part of a community. So I think it very much shapes everything from obviously our healthcare to our social services and everything. There's always an overriding sense of we're better as a collective than we are as individuals. And
absolutely. And I think that often people lump Canadians and Americans together just because of the shared geography and sometimes political alliance. But yes, recognizing that each place is distinct, but we can collaborate.
Absolutely.
I think is very valuable. I also like the format, the model of, you know, we all have a general permit with specialties that we can kind of lean into that identifier, because you wouldn't, well, I guess you could, but you probably wouldn't only be, I'm an RP, and like be proud of that, because it almost is so vague, it doesn't mean as much.
Yeah. And I think it's a great model, because then say, you know, down the road there becomes other things that people like, you know, this would be really interesting therapeutic approach and you know, and it means it can come up into it rather than being shut out by governmental or legislative or licensing rules.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Well, then, you know, because we're almost looking at this infrastructurally and culturally, how do you see family therapy, systemic therapy, systemic psychotherapy either changing or finding its footing around the world?
I think with the pandemic, I think so many people realize the world's a lot bigger than they ever thought, because everything moved to these virtual platforms where, well, you and I can have this conversation and we don't have to get on a plane. So, and I think it also highlighted to those of us, I think any of us who are systemic in our viewpoints, whether it's our worldview or our professional or clinical view, it really kind of highlights saying, why are we in all these silos? Like, I'm just in the Canadian Association and I just know the Canadian people. You know, what about the people down in the States? What about, well, everybody knows everybody in the States, because, you know, it's always, obviously it's one of the biggest countries in terms of its impact on the field. But I want to know more about what's going on in the UK, Latvia, France, Spain. So this idea of sort of, can we get out of our silos? I think is resonating with a lot of people, because you can do this. It's easy to have a meeting on Zoom. It's easy to talk with somebody in Australia or New Zealand. You know, I think the old model of where every meeting sort of was always like, you got to get on a plane and go, or else it's not really a meeting. I think it's finally fallen to the wayside. I think this whole notion of the virtual has really embedded itself in a way that did not exist prior to the pandemic. And I really believe that the whole field of systemic relational world will become much more international, but truly international, not one group dominating, but it's everybody, interacting with everybody and everybody influencing everybody in slightly different ways and sharing their different perspectives that will, I think, fundamentally change. I'd say 10 years from now, we're all going to have a much more international perspective of the field just because of the ability for like you and I to have this conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, there still will be lots of bureaucratic hurdles
Of
for
course.
the therapy to cross all the lines.
Right.
But I do see what you are talking about with the shared information, knowledge, et cetera. Um, are there either countries that you have noticed or people that you've even maybe interacted with that you feel like have a lot of energy that our international viewing audience would benefit from looking into?
It feels like, well, this is also a very Canadian perspective. We're always like, let's be multinational, like, peacekeeping, all this. It's like, we know, the population of Canada is smaller than the population of Tokyo, the city. Okay.
Yeah.
All Canadians could fit into the population of California. So to get anything done, we're always like, who else can we work with? Who else can we work with? So I have really noticed whenever I talk about, sort of the idea of like, well, how can we collaborate? I rarely get somebody saying, no, I don't want to collaborate. Pretty much everybody's like, wow, that would be great. That would be fantastic. And definitely, like, we started reaching out to some people, systemic, practitioners in Kenya and Nigeria who are really like, we'd love to talk with you about the field and how we look at it and how you look at it. And what I really love is this everybody wanting to meet as equals, not this, we don't say, hey, we'll come in and teach you how to do it. We're like, hey, we'd love to hear how you do it. And we'd love to share how we do it. But it's a meeting of equals, even talk to some folks in Israel who have their, very different perspective, but they're very open to saying, yeah, this is how we've been doing it. We'd love to know how you do it. And I think that's what's been, I think, the most heartening in all of this is so many people wanting to share as equals, not as looking either as, first, remember first order change. Oh, Mnuchin, everybody's up on the pedestal. It's like, no, how about we all be, the same level? And I think that I'm really hoping that continues and more that we see that because I think that'll really spread the message of relational systemic work, especially into, some countries that still have very hardcore sort of medical model, very highly individualistic, structures, which we know in a lot of areas doesn't work. So
right. Yes, I'm thinking of some of the rigid individual countries and even some of the rigid collectivist countries. The adaptability to family change is in some ways the heart of our, I don't know, or the catalyst that we bring to a system. And so I think that learning from a variety of dynamics, paradigms, cultures from everywhere. Maybe it's not the old salon where we learn and we create and blah, 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 but I have to imagine that it's going to bring less judgment, less fear, less vitriol and, eventual hate or, xenophobic thoughts that we unfortunately are also growing in our world as a whole.
But is that not more, that's when people get stuck in the silos of where they're just with people who they see as being very like-minded, very, in their sort of little bubble. Because when you open it up to larger, it's not, oh, you're wrong. It's like, oh, you're different.
I think that's where the therapeutic mentality about recognizing that the siloed people are wrestling with their own fear and shame. And it is true that some of those people will never leave their cave. They will never leave. And honestly, it's okay. Stay there.
That's
We
right.
got a big party out here. We're having fun. You can come out anytime you want, but I understand if you don't want to.
Right. And once again, it's not about shaming them. It's saying, look,
Right.
okay, people have different ways of dealing with the world and interpreting it. And just being sorry, my dog's throwing me off there
All
because
good.
he decides to bark at everybody. It's sort of like come to the table as you want to come to the table. All we're saying is play nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And if you don't want to play nice, that's fine. You can go have your playroom and your sandbox and do whatever you want in it. That's fine with me. But we're trying to sort of say, at the end of the day, any of us got into this field, into this work, is because at the end of the day, we wanted to help people.
Yeah.
We had this sort of also a burning curiosity of like, is there another way to help people? Because
Mm-hmm.
most of us did grow up in very, very rigid sort of medical model, even clinical models, when we were younger. And so the idea of saying, can we expand from that is still a relatively new phenomenon if you're really looking at sort of the arc of history.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, Foucault would have a great deal to say on that one.
No kidding. Yeah, he'd be like, holy, what's going on here? Yeah.
I think that you're speaking to the heart of systemic psychotherapists around the world, because the reason why we are systemic psychotherapists is we believe in the interconnectedness of health and systems and people. And if we can isomorphically practice that with our organizations, then I do agree in the sort of not trickle down, but it's certainly parallel processing of change.
Well, that's always my big joke, is sort of like, okay, so we're all practicing family therapy, systemic, relational, and then our associations are like, no, you can't be a member of my association because you live in another country. I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm.
That makes no sense. Oh no, you can't present because you don't meet this, and this, or have this licensure. I'm like, it's almost ridiculous. It's it's almost like, what is it? It's almost something that belongs like in a Monty Python skit. It's got that feel to it. Or remember Brazil, that kind of like, this doesn't add up. If we're systemic, let's be systemic. Okay? If we're not, we're not. But really?
Well, and part of IFTA's goal is very much finding a space where different people from different regions and different cultures can learn from, coordinate, collaborate, and participate in the change of systemic family therapy. So
absolutely. I really, really see, like, I'm a member of IFTA, and I really believe in IFTA. Like, IFTA talk about the potential, because the concept of an international, family therapy association, where it's okay, can we get everybody into this tent? A big tent, but it's a big tent, not with a high podium with one person going, hey, this is the way we're doing it. It's just, can we really all be in that tent together? Can we all be at the table together and really share and collaborate and learn from each other and teach each other and help each other in whichever way we can?
Right.
And we're fortunate we actually live in a time where you can do that.
Yes, absolutely. Your passion for collaboration, not just as a Canadian cultural value, but as a systemic therapy value, I think is a wonderful call. And I really appreciate spending some time with you today. And thank you for sharing this with the rest of the organization.
My pleasure, Dan. I mean, I'm fascinated by this. Well, you can't go into this field without being fascinated by it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and
thanks.
take care.
Okay.